We have no projects due this week, no tests due this week. Your next test is Friday, and I think we'll make it. We're making pretty good progress. Friday, the 9th of December, so that's a week from this Friday is your test. We're about a third of the way done with the notes, maybe even all 40%. But we do have 2 films next week. Each one of them is an hour in length. One is about building castles in the Middle Ages, and the other one's about building cathedrals. So that will use up 2 days of class next week. So I imagine it'll take us to Friday to get ready for the test. That's the 9th. A test is big. It'll be probably 50. Last year's was 60 questions. I don't know. We'll see what we get to, but it's one of our bigger tests. And also there is an essay test over this year. Okay, so that will come probably on Tuesday or Wednesday of the next week. The second thing I need to have you do is this. Remember, if you have any missing work, you need to get it in to me. This afternoon when Mr. Harold is teaching, it is my goal to sit back there where Aaron is and to divide that new inch worth of makeup work that's arrived on my desk in the last 2 days before we went home for Thanksgiving, to get that all in the grade book. Some of it's graded and some of it's not, but I want to get it all taken care of and in the grade book. So I would say if you look at progress book in another 2 or 3 days, it'll be 100% up to date. If there's something missing still, you better come and see me. Remember that for all intents and purposes, this quarter ends on Wednesday the 22nd. That's our last day before we go home for Christmas vacation. And remember, this year exams are before Christmas, not after. So when you go home to the last 3 days before Christmas, I don't know what the exam schedule is. I haven't seen one yet, but I imagine we'll be getting an email. And the moment I get it, I'll run off copies, have them up here so that you can pick them up. But the exams will be spread over, I believe, 3 days is my understanding. And we have, and I always give you, I'll give you sort of a rough idea of what the questions are going to be so that you can kind of focus on the areas that you want to write about. I think that's about all, and Mr. Harold and I will stop grades on the 22nd. Anything after the 22nd will be on quarter number 3. Okay, it's a little strange this year. We do exams, but the quarter actually lasts officially for about 7 more days after that. Well, I'm not going to come back after Christmas, and we'll take grades for quarter 2. Anything we do after Christmas will be on quarter number 3. Does anybody have any questions about schedule, about what's coming up? Yeah.
What's the point of cornucopia?
Cornucopia for Thanksgiving, I assume you mean. It's the universal, well, I shouldn't say, the universal Western symbol of plenty. That's
symbol of plenty.
Plenty. That's why you have a cornucopia on your Thanksgiving table.
What is a cornucopia?
Well, it's a kind of weird looking basket that's shaped like this round opening. We had one on our Thanksgiving table. What?
Does it look like a horn with like
kind of a horn with little gourds and flowers, etc. Okay. Anything else? Miss Muller, are you okay? You're sure? Anything else? All right, then would you please turn to your notes. Today's date's the 28th. Oh, by the way, at the end of class on Friday, you might want to write down, those of you that are interested, 16 test questions, 6 bonus, 16 test questions, 6 bonus questions. Let me pick up the thread where we were. I have a sneaking suspicion that very few of you have given any thought to this since last, whatever it was, Tuesday. When you think of the Middle Ages, ladies, when you think of the Middle Ages, there are 4 themes, 4 facets, 4 components, 4 parts to history of the time period. And they're the 4 aspects of feudalism, which is the ism that we apply to Middle Ages. Most periods in history have an ism. The ism for the Middle Ages is feudalism. And it is a political system, a social system, an economic system, and a military system. We covered 3 of those before you went home for Thanksgiving. We'll cover the 4th today. And then the second thing we're going to talk about that's new today is we're going to talk about land, because land was the all-important commodity of the medieval time period. Okay? Social system, and you should have in your notes a pyramid drawn. Check to make sure you do. Okay? The social structure of the Middle Ages was extremely rigid. As the Middle Ages went on, it loosened up a little bit, and the further west in Europe you went, the more loose it was. In other words, you had more likelihood of being able to improve your social standing if you lived in England in the year 1200 than you did if you lived in Eastern Germany in the year 700. Am I making sense? The further on in time you went and the further west you went, the more likelihood that you could rise in your social system. Give you an example. Henry VIII of England ruled for the first 50 years of the 16th century. Okay? 1509 to 1546 to be exact. And Henry VIII's chief minister during much of his reign, okay, was Lord Wimbledon, like as in the tennis court. In fact, the tennis match that happens every summer at Wimbledon takes place where his estate once was. That's where the Royal England Tennis Club has its headquarters. And Wimbledon was born the son of a butcher. Let me say that again. His daddy was a butcher. Lower edge, middle class England. Okay? In one lifetime, he went from being a butcher's son to the Lord High Chancellor of England, the most important government official next to the king. That was very unusual in his lifetime. It would have been impossible 500 years before that, and it still would have been impossible in Eastern Europe when he does it in England. Okay? So, social mobility, the further west you go was more likely, and the further towards modern times you went was more likely. Okay? Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Yeah, otherwise I'd have the word static down. Social system was a static social system. You tended to do the job your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather did. Yes?
Is it
Wimbledon, W-I-M-B-L-E-T-O-N. I'll never ask you that. Okay, that's a bonus question 2 tests from that. Okay, I just use that as a good example. A man was able to go from the son of a butcher to the Lord High Chancellor of England in one lifetime. Okay, normally that's something that would take 6 or 7 generations to make that kind of social change, if at all. You should have down in your notes at the top was the king or whoever the highest official in the country was. For example, in Luxembourg, which still exists, Luxembourg's a little country right here where France and Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium all come together. A little country about the size of not even as big as New Jersey, probably about Delaware. And to this day, the head of state of Luxembourg is the Grand Duke. Okay, so it could be a we put the king on our chart, but it would be whoever the highest official was is at the top. Underneath of him comes vassals, V-A-S-S-A-L-S, certainly a test question. Vassals were the nobility that were beneath the king, okay? And then holding all of this up, because that's only about 2% of the population. The other 90% of the population, or 95% or 98% of the population, depending on where you are, were the serfs, S-E-R-F-S. And I think we wrote down in our notes, do we not, the phrase bound to the soil? Bound to the soil, bound to the soil. The idea was you weren't a slave, okay? Technically, slavery did not exist in Western Europe, okay? But you were not allowed to leave. You stayed. If you lived on the Jackson estates, when your children were born, they stayed on the Jackson estates, okay? You were bound to the soil. You had to work on that land. Yes?
Those were the serfs.
Those were the serfs, yes.
Paid to work?
Pardon me?
Were they like paid to work?
Yeah, they were paid. They were.
So they were paid but just stuck there.
But stuck there, exactly right. And of course, you probably weren't paid in coin. because in the Middle Ages there's almost no money in circulation at all. You would have been paid in kind. In other words, you got a percentage of the goods off of the estate or something
Did you
like that.
live there or just?
And you'd live there. No, you'd live right on the land of whoever the person was that you worked for. Okay. The other thing about this time period that you want to write down as far as the social structure is concerned is there's no middle class. The middle class is almost non-existent. Okay? Only in a few rare towns, and there were no towns in this time period much bigger than Washington Courthouse. That would have been a major capital city. And only there would be a few people that were, people that work for a job, like making barrels or making candlesticks or doing something like that. Now that class is going to grow the longer the Middle Ages persists, but at much of the Middle Ages there's almost no middle class. It's just serfs, vassals, and the king at the top of the social heap. Everybody understands social structure in the Middle Ages. Okay, that's the first of the four aspects of feudalism. The second is it's a political system. Kings had almost no employees. One, how do you pay them? Because there's no such thing as coins. Okay, money is almost non-existent. How do you pay them? And number two is, how do you run this? Because almost nobody can read and write. Paper is extremely rare and very expensive. Books are non-existent. Most royal households, most countries, it's estimated, for example, that England's government was smaller than the government of Madison County. If you took the employees that work for this county, sheriff's department, roads department, and the people working in the courthouse, that was more employees than the king had to run all of England. Okay, the royal household. So you were dependent, if you were king, on this. We're back to the pyramid again. You were dependent on your vassals to run your land for you. I am in the capital city, okay, and way back at the back of the room is Mr. Harold. He's in the process of building a structure back there for our defense. He's doing it for me. I send him a message and I say, Duke Harold, I'm very worried about that back corner of the country. I'm so afraid that the Dronites may come in at any time. We need to have a castle back there to defend that part of the country. That is your responsibility. I will give you some land as payment for doing that for me. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to land. But it was a system of government. Okay? And the phrase you should have down in your notes is local control, local responsibility. Okay? Duke Harold is responsible for defending that area. Duke Harold is responsible for raising the troops to defend that area, in some way paying those troops. It's not my responsibility. I'm king. I have my own lands that I'm responsible for, the royal domain, okay, R-O-Y-A-L-D-O-M-A-I-N, the royal domain, but the rest of the country is responsibility of the vassals, okay, that work for me. Everybody comfortable with that? Third part of this feudalism-ism is economic, okay? And just as these local areas were responsible for their defense, etc., they're also responsible for taking care of themselves. You don't go to Walmart's and buy what you need. If you live in the Middle Ages, everything you consume every day of your life is raised there. There is no transportation. Okay? There is no goods coming in from outside the area. Okay? Whatever you raise on your land, your manor, to use the medieval term, M-A-N-O-R, that's what you have to. So the skins from the animals that you hunt are what your clothes are made out of, or the wool that you take off of the sheep that you raise. Every item of food that you eat, everything that you drink, all comes from that spot. The only exception to this was salt. Salt was not only used for seasoning, because it was the only seasoning there was in Western Europe, but more importantly, it was used for preserving food. You salted food if you didn't smoke it or just eat it right away. You salted it, and that was one of the few things that might be traded, okay? Because there might be a salt lick on Mr. Ridenauer's estate, and I may make arrangement with the little bit of money that I have in my castle and my strong box, all coins from the ancient Roman times or the Eastern Roman Empire. I might buy some salt for you and then distribute it as favors to my employees on my land for things that they did for me. But other than that, almost everything came from right where you were. Okay? Did we not talk about the three-field system, right? Okay, you have three-field system down, right? We're all taken care of on the economic system, okay? Land system. All right, then the last thing we need to talk about is the military. And you should have a castle diagram that I gave you as a handout. It looks like, I'll tell you, you are organized, okay? It looks like this, okay? It looks like this. No problem, we can handle that. Let's do this and then we'll take a break. Yeah, let me see. One that looks like this. Who needs one of these? Here's one. You may have one. Thank you. Anybody else need one? Okay. Who here's on our chess team? Do we have a chess team this year? Okay. First thing you want to write down, chess is a medieval game. It was invented about 10 to 1100 AD. And chess is a very accurate representation of medieval war. With the pawns, who are actually what's the unpaid conscripted worker serfs, okay? And you have a symbol, a rook, that stands for the castle. You have the king, you have the bishop, which is the role of the church in warfare. It's a pretty good comparison to medieval military science. There are three probably major components of medieval warfare. One is infantry. This was mostly serfs, pawns, and they wore no uniforms. They just wore whatever they came. Don't imagine, 18th century red coats, for example. No, you wore whatever you just happened to have to wear. Your weapons were not issued to you by the government in most cases. They were individually made, and they, of course, nothing uses gunpowder because gunpowder hasn't been invented yet. They're mostly cutting, smashing, clubbing, crunching kind of things, okay? You are, on the ground. The only person that has a horse would be the nobleman who is commanding you, okay? So, infantry. Second was a knight, okay? K-N-I-G-H-T, knight. A knight was the jet pilot of his age. The analogy to a modern day jet pilot is pretty good, okay? If you stop and think about the modern day fighter jet aircraft used by the United States Air Force, to fly one of those, what must you be? You must be an officer. You must be the modern equivalent of an aristocrat, okay? If you're just a common schnook, you don't fly a jet fighter for any Air Force in the world. It's always flown by an officer. You aren't going to give a common schnook a $48 million aircraft, okay? The knight was an aristocrat. He was trained from 14 years of age to be a knight. And of course, if you're a knight, what are you wearing?
Armor.
Armor, such as this guy right here, up on the display board here. You're wearing armor, body armor, Comes in a variety of kinds, from chain mail to solid armor. Okay, this isn't a military history class, so we won't go into the fine points. But you had to have assistance getting in this outfit. Once you're in it, you couldn't get out of it unless somebody helped you out of it. Often, if you were wearing a full set of body armor, you couldn't even get on the horse by yourself. Go back to Henry VIII, who had been at the tail end of the Middle Ages. The famous thing is, because Henry already weighed about 300 pounds, 350 pounds, probably by the end of his life, and you put 125 pounds of armor on him, he weighed nigh on to 500 pounds. So to get on his horse, they had to use a block and tackle to lift him up and lower him onto the horse. Okay? God forbid he ever fell off, he couldn't get up. Okay? And that, of course, was one of the problems with a knight. I may not be able to do anything with you wearing the body armor, because my sword won't penetrate you. But the moment you're lying helpless on the ground, all I have to do is come up and find a place in the armor plates where there's a gap and thrust my sword in, and you're a dead man. There's nothing you can do about it. So as a knight, the worst thing that could happen to you was to be dehorsed. Okay? The knight carried a lance, right? Lance. Okay, a lance. And what was the purpose of that lance? To dehorse people, exactly right. Okay, to try to knock them off of their horses. Of course, as you can imagine, as a knight, though, you had tremendous advantage over a pawn or a serf. If you're a serf soldier in infantry and you're down there on the ground, okay, with your puny little shield and your puny little sword, and I come riding up on 2 tons worth of horse, which was also wearing body armor. I'm wearing armor that you can't do anything against, and I have a lance that's about 12 feet long. I can run you through with that razor-sharp lance before you're ever even close enough to do anything to me. Okay. So another analogy you might want to write down for a horse is it was the tank of its age. Okay. It was the tank, the armored vehicle of its time. Now the third component that you want to have down about medieval warfare is the castle. Okay? Now in front of you, you have this castle right here. Okay, it's up on the display board. And it's going to be the one that you're going to see in the film next week. Okay? The castle is not a real castle. So someplace on the sheet you want to write down, this is a composite. It's a composite of several famous castles in history. All of them are English, so this is an English-style castle. You and I could show you a picture of an English castle, and a French castle, a German castle, and you and I look at it and probably not be able to tell the difference. Trust me, if you were a military person of the time period, you'd take one look at it and say, oh, that's a French castle. Okay? They did have some distinctive traits, but for our purposes, a castle is essentially a castle. Okay? Now, there's some terminology you need to know. Okay? Castles were usually, in the beginning, mounted on a hill. Why?
Because
Harder for troops to get up.
More defensible. Why? They had to go up the hill. Okay? Later on, as digging skills became better, what did they put around the castle? Not a swamp. A moat. Okay? You want to write down moat. Moat was a trench filled with water around the castle, which obviously made getting to the walls of the castle much more difficult. Okay? So you want to write down a castle was naturally situated on a place that was made it defending it easier, either a hill or surrounded by walls. Okay? Walls were, in the early days, wood, but by the time we get to the latter Middle Ages, stone. And they were one of the biggest engineering projects of the time period to build them. Often they would take 50, 75 years to build unless the king of the country used royal money, royal support, royal finances to build them. And the film's going to point out that one of the great English kings, Edward of England, did exactly that. Okay? He used the royal treasury to build these castles in Wales, which he had recently taken over, and he was afraid the Welsh people were going to rise up against him. So he built these castles across Wales, which still exist, whose purpose was to keep the Welsh people down. Okay? And obviously they weren't inhabited by Welsh, they were inhabited by English people and English noblemen. Okay? And the same principle was used all over Europe. You could have French occupying, some other piece of territory that they had acquired with these castles, or they were used to defend your borders. Okay. At each of the major corners or points in the castle, you had a tall structure, known as obviously a tower. Okay. They were frequently round. Why?
So they could drop down in them like when firefighters drop down.
Not firefighters. Okay. What are you saying?
I have no idea.
Well, then somebody help him out. Okay. Why were the towers round? There's several reasons.
You could see all around.
Well, one, you could see all around. They were high, so you could see around, yes. But why round? A square tower would do nicely. Round was the tower of choice. Projectiles would ricochet off if you were firing a stone. We'll talk about the things that launch these in a little while. It would ricochet off. Also, there are no corners. It made it easier to kill people, okay, because there was no place for anybody to hide down around the bottom, okay? It was a rounded structure. So, stronger, rounded, harder to hide if you were attacking, rounded, tall, so you could see in the distance, were the towers. In between are what are called curtain walls, okay, curtain walls, okay, are the big walls that connect the towers together. You had to have a way to get in and out of the castle, which was the gatehouse. The gatehouse. And the gatehouse was always a masterpiece of defense, because if you have 12-foot thick stone walls and you have a gate, obviously the weak point is that gate. So they did everything they could to make that gate more defensible. Now you might want to watch this, okay? This is a castle and here's the gate. I'm on the other side, there's a moat. Obviously, to get to that gate, what am I going to need? A drawbridge. Now, what does the word drawbridge mean? Okay, how does it move? It moves up and down, okay? Now, in this day and age before motors, what is going to allow it to go up and down? Pulley system attached to counterweights. Yes, you want to talk about it. It was based on a counterweight system. As the weight went down, it pulled the bridge up. Okay, so then you would crank the bridge down, and then when you released it, it would automatically come up, because you don't want to have to be cranking that bridge up as an enemy is attacking. You want it to come up as quickly as possible. So the drawbridge got you across the moat into the castle. Here are two large, thick wooden gates, probably 6 or 8 inches thick, reinforced with iron bars across the back, with a drawbar slid across so the gate can't open on the inside. Everybody knows what a drawbar is? A big piece of wood that slides across, keeps the gate closed. But let's say someone uses a battering ram and gets through that gate. There's going to be something up in the ceiling called a portcullis, P-O-R-T-C-O-L-L-U-S or I-S, okay? Portcullis, P-O-R-T-C-O-L-L-I-S is the usual spelling, portcullis. It also worked on a counterweight system. It was a series of wooden iron bars, okay? It came down out of the ceiling. You simply released it and down it dropped. Let's say that there's 100 of soldiers coming into this passageway leading between the gates. We've broken down the first gate. We get to about this far, and after we get so far towards the second gate, we release the portcullis and it comes down, trapping us. Okay? Along the sides of this, we have arrow loops, right? Everybody know what an arrow loop would be. Obviously, what would you fire through an arrow loop? Arrows. And these were all around the castle, on the top of the walls, in the towers, and in the sides of the passageway leading into the castle, so that we could shoot arrows from the side, okay? So, here are the 100 men. I'm on the other side of the stone wall here, my soldiers, and we're firing arrows at these people. Also, overhead, watch out, overhead, we have something called a murder hole, okay? A murder hole was in the ceiling of the passageway between the gates. It was about like the size of a manhole would be today. And this thing would be used to fire arrows down from above. You could throw rocks down. You could throw boiling, nobody would use actual oil. You hear that all the time, but oil was way too expensive. But boiling water, you could have thrown burning embers down on them. A dead cat, whatever you particularly wanted to do. Okay? But the idea was to make life miserable for the inside. And then there would have been a second set of gates. So gates, portcullis, gates, arrow loops, murder holes. So getting through a gate was a fairly difficult proposition. Okay? Down underneath, we have a place where we store things. We also keep prisoners down there. It's one of the almost comic book phrases of this time period. What do we call this? Dungeon. Okay, there's the dungeon down below. Used for a rare prisoner. Also used for doing bad things to prisoners if we needed information from them. And also used for supplies. Another thing, of course, is the castle, the chateau, the schloss, was the place where the local nobleman lived. So you had to have living quarters inside the castle. And there's one room that you want to know out of that living quarters. There was always a big, quote, family room of the castle. Okay? It's where people gathered in the evening for their evening meal. It's where ceremonial occasions took place. It's where the nobleman entertained his guests. It was called the Great Hall. Every castle had a Great Hall. There's some of them still in existence. Thank you. There's some of them that still exist in some of, if you ever go to England, Penhurst Place is probably the single best preserved medieval Great Hall, to the point that the fire, there's still a smoke hole in the ceiling. I think we talked about the other day, the chimney was invented in the Middle Ages. And so when you were burning before the invention of the chimney, you simply had a hole in the roof for the smoke to go out through it. Penhurst Place, the big stone platform where they built the fire, and the smoke hole was still there all these many, many hundreds of years later. Almost all medieval houses have long since had that taken care of, because obviously that wasted heat was much inferior to having a fireplace. Now, my question for you is, there is our castle. Okay? We need to take this castle out. How are we going to take it out? The nobleman has brought up the drawbridge. He has a well on the inside that provides him with an adequate supply of water. He has 2 or 3 months worth of food stuff stored in the dungeon and the lower levels of the towers. How are we going to take out the castle? Mr. Isaacs. Pardon me? All right, let's talk about, we're going to attack it with weapons. Okay? What kind of weapon are you going to have to take out a castle? You want to write down 2. Okay? 1, the catapult. Well, we may even do 3. A catapult, a ballista, B-A-L-L-I-S-T-A, ballista, B-A-L-L-I-S-T-A, ballista, B-A-L-L-I-S-T-A, a catapult, and a trebuchet, T-R-E-B-U-T-C-H-E. Let me spell this on the board. There we go. Okay, T-R-E-B-U-C-H-E-T, trebuchet. Obviously French. Okay. Trebuchet, ballista, which is Latin, and a catapult. Anybody know what a ballista is?
Big crossbow.
Big crossbow, exactly right. It is a large spear arrow-like thing, maybe about this long. Okay? And you cranked it back. It used rawhide or some other substance to make the string out of. You cranked it back, released it, and it launched this thing. It would fire about as far as from here down to the football field. Okay? And you could use it to, fire burning, like wrap the tip of the arrow with all sorts of rags and set it alight and launch it out into the enemy, or maybe where their supplies were, whatever the case might be. Or if you were on the outside in, you would fire it in and attempt to catch the castle on fire. Okay, a ballista. It's a Roman device, still used in the Middle Ages. Yes?
Will you spell it again?
B-A-L-L-I-S-T-A, ballista. A catapult does what? launches rocks. Okay. Usually, ideally, these rocks would be cut so they were rounded, because they would go farther if they were rounded. Obviously, you could just launch any old rock, but it goes farther if it's rounded. Right? It also bounces and rolls farther. And it will operate on a spring. Okay, essentially the same principle as a ballistic, except it's throwing a rock. And these rocks would vary in size from something like this to something like this. Now you imagine that you're a bunch of soldiers out on the field, and a rock about this big comes at you at 75 miles an hour, okay, and it hits the ground. It's going to do a lot of damage. If it hits you, it's going to smash you into hamburger. Even if it hits in front of you, it's going to be like a giant bowling ball, okay, going down through the ground until it comes to stop, taking people out. So it's a pretty, and of course you could also launch them at the side of the castle walls. One isn't going to do a whole lot of damage, but if you bombard a castle for 4 days at the same stretch of wall, rock after rock smashing into it, sooner or later that castle wall is probably going to give away. The third is the trebuchet, which no one used to know anything about, but today almost everybody does, because, for example, if you watched them, I think it was Military Channel or one of those channels over the weekend, they had the annual pumpkin competition, okay, where different schools in the United States construct trebuchets and they launch pumpkins, okay, and see who can launch the pumpkin the farthest. I think the winner this year was about 3,000 feet, 2/3 of a mile, okay. And again, they didn't in real life launch pumpkins, they launched rocks, okay? And it operated on the system of a counterweight, okay? You cranked the trebuchet in position, there was a big stone weight, you released it, the weight dropped, and that flung, okay, the rock further than a catapult would, okay? Now the trebuchet just had one nasty, well actually two nasty habits. One, they had a tendency to snap under the strain. So you would go to launch the thing, and instead of launching the rock, it would launch part of the trebuchet like a missile out one direction or another, which was sort of hard on your side. The other habit was they had a nasty habit of every once in a while launching the rock straight up. Okay? So when it would crank, it would go, halumpa, but instead of throwing the rock that way, the rock would go straight up, and everybody would be looking and say, can you see where it's going? Whack! It comes right back down on the spot where it had been launched from. So it's sort of hard on the crew when it malfunctions. Okay? Well, those all work. Another thing is a siege tower. What is a siege tower? Yes, okay. Imagine a tower on wheels made out of wood. Okay, covered sometimes with wet skins so that it can't be set on fire. And you had to push it from behind into position, okay, which can be dangerous. And then once you got into position, soldiers came in. If this is the wall here, and the tower is rolled up next to the wall, there's soldiers coming in on this side, going up the stairs or the ladders and coming out on the top. And where does that put them at? The top of the wall. You want to write down it got soldiers up to the top of the wall. And then if you could fight your way into the castle, you could win. The single best way, and this didn't work very well if you had a moat, the single best way if you were attacking a castle without a moat was to dig a tunnel. Okay? What was called mining. What you did is, if this is the wall, right here where Mr. Mitchell is, this is the wall right across here. Out here about half a football field's length, we would start digging a tunnel down through the ground. Okay? We'd be out far enough where we'd be protected from anything the castle could launch at us, and we would start digging and digging and digging and digging and digging and digging and digging down about 20 feet in the ground, a tunnel. And as we're going along, we're putting wooden supports up to hold the ceiling in, digging and 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 digging, and hopefully we have measured this correctly so that we don't run into the foundations. We're coming in under the foundations of the wall, digging and digging and digging and digging and digging and digging. And then we fill this mine shaft with every flammable thing we can think of, and we set it alight. And it burns. And as it burns out the timbers, what happens to all the ground above it? It comes crashing down into the tunnel, right? What happens to the foundations of the castle wall? Come crashing down. When the foundations collapse underneath, what happens to the wall? falls. And what are you ready to do the moment that wall comes down? Charge in. Okay? So it was known as mining, a very popular form, but it will only work, obviously, if there's a moat here. What's going to be the problem? Okay, all you have to do is have a leak spring and you drown your entire mining crew. So it didn't work very well in a castle that had a moat around it. I think we've covered about everything that we need to cover. Okay? Seems to me there was one other thing I wanted to mention. I can't remember what it is. Armies. Knights. Castle. Seems there was one other thing I wanted to mention to you, but I can't think what it is. Aaron.
What was the church's role?
The church's role is that the church actually has its own military force, the Knights Templar. Okay? And the church often was behind the scene, prodding people into action. Okay? And also the church is the only organization that could stop something like this, because the church would issue a break to the fighting, recess to the fighting, and we'll talk about that when we get to the powers of the church. Yes?
For our test, do we have to know like the layout of this?
You need to know the basic parts of a castle, the basic parts of medieval military, probably more bonus questions than test questions.